The lecture hall was shaped like a bowl, with hundreds of seats rising in wide circles around a glowing platform at the center. Cadets from dozens of species filled the rows, tall ones, short ones, some with fur, some with scales, some with skin that shifted color when they breathed. The air smelled faintly of copper because the station recycled everything, even the atmosphere itself. It was the first week at the Galactic Union Military Academy on Aelos, and every cadet in the room was trying very hard to look like they belonged. Instructor Dorvan stood at the center platform. He was Scythek, a reptilian species with dark green skin, a heavy jaw, and eyes like 2 drops of hot amber. He had been teaching combat theory and xenobiology at the academy for 19 years, and he had never once smiled during a lecture. His voice was low and steady, the kind that filled a room without effort. "Today," Dorvan said, tapping the holographic display behind him, "we cover planetary danger classifications." A chart appeared in the air. It listed worlds by class, from Class 1 at the bottom, calm, stable, barely any weather, all the way up to Class 12 at the top. Each level added more danger, more predators, more disease, more geological violence. By Class 8, most species could not survive without full environmental suits. By Class 10, even machines had trouble lasting more than a few cycles. Class 12 was marked in red and had a single word next to it: theoretical. Class 12 worlds, Dorvan said, are defined by the presence of all major hostility factors simultaneously: active tectonics, extreme weather, high radiation, apex predators across all biomes, pathogenic microorganisms capable of rapid mutation, atmospheric oxygen at near combustion levels. He paused and let the words settle. No verified sapient species has ever evolved on a Class 12 world. These planets do not produce civilizations. They produce extinction events. A few cadets laughed nervously. A Grand cadet named Olur, who was built like a small boulder with arms, cracked his thick knuckles and grinned. He came from a heavy gravity world and already considered himself the strongest in the class. The idea of a world more dangerous than his own amused him. Dorvan continued, scrolling through images of hostile worlds: volcanic plains, oceans full of massive creatures, skies choked with storms. These environments are useful for theoretical study. They help us understand the upper limits of biological survival. But in practical terms, they are empty. No one lives there. No one could. A hand went up in the back row. Dorvan's amber eyes flicked upward. The hand belonged to a small figure sitting alone at the end of a bench. She wore a standard-issue cadet uniform that was slightly too large for her frame. Her hair was black and pulled back tight. Her skin was a warm brown, and her eyes were dark and steady. She did not look remarkable in any way. She looked, if anything, plain. "Yes, cadet." Dorvan checked his list. "Han Yuna." "My homeworld is classified Class 12, she said. Her voice was calm and clear, like she was reporting the weather. The room went silent. Then someone laughed, a short, sharp sound from one of the middle rows. Then another. A few cadets turned to look at her, with expressions caught between confusion and amusement. Olur leaned forward in his seat, squinting. Dorvan did not laugh. He stared at Yuna for a long moment, then turned to his display and entered a query. A planet appeared, blue and green and white, wrapped in swirling clouds, orbited by a single gray moon. The data filled the screen beside it. Planet Earth. Classification: recently revised. Previous: undocumented. Current: Class 12. The laughter stopped. Dorvan read the details out loud, slowly. Active tectonic plates, over 15 major ones, constantly shifting, generating earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. A magnetic field, powered by a spinning core of molten iron. Oceans covering 70% of the surface, filled with predators, ranging from microscopic parasites to creatures longer than a shuttle. Weather systems, including hurricanes, tornadoes, blizzards, and lightning storms. A biosphere built entirely on competitive evolution, where every living thing either ate something else or was eaten. Atmospheric oxygen at 21%, high enough to feed fire. The cadets stared at the screen. Then they stared at Yuna. She sat very still, her hands folded in her lap. She did not look proud or embarrassed. She simply waited. A Veeth cadet, tall, thin, with translucent wings folded flat against its back, raised a trembling hand. "Instructor, is this accurate?" "The data comes from a Union survey team that visited the planet 2 cycles ago," Dorvan said. His voice had changed. It was quieter now. The survey was cut short after 3 members of the team required emergency medical extraction. One suffered a bacterial infection from exposure to local soil. Another was stung by a small flying insect and experienced a near-fatal immune response. The third was caught in a sudden rainstorm and suffered hypothermia. He looked at Yuna. "You live in these conditions?" "Everyone on Earth does," Yuna said. "There are 8 billion of us." Nobody spoke after that. The lecture ended early. Yuna walked back to her quarters alone. The hallways of the academy were wide and clean, built for species of all sizes. She passed cadets who stepped aside when they saw her, not out of respect, but out of something else. Something closer to the way a person might step around an animal they did not understand. Her quarters were small, a single bunk, a desk, a narrow window that looked out at the stars. She had no roommate. When the assignments were posted, no species had volunteered to share a room with her. She sat on the bunk and pulled out a small communication pad. She typed a short message to Bake Tejo, the human liaison officer at the Union Embassy 3 systems away. He was the closest thing she had to a friend out here. His reply came quickly. "How was the first week?" "They think I am a myth," she typed back. There was a pause. Then, "They don't hate you. They just don't believe you are real yet. Prove them wrong." Slowly, Yuna set the pad down and looked at her hands. They were ordinary hands. Small, brown, a little calloused from years of training. On Earth, she was nothing special. A good soldier, a decent student, someone who worked hard and complained little. Here, those same hands had broken a machine designed to measure grip strength, and she had not even been trying. She stood up, grabbed the bar mounted above her door, and began doing pull-ups. The station's gravity was set to 1.3 times Earth standard, the galactic norm for military facilities. Most cadets from lighter worlds struggled just to walk comfortably in it. Yuna did not even notice the difference. Outside her window, the stars turned slowly as Alo's station rotated through the dark. Somewhere far away, a blue and green planet full of storms and monsters and 8 billion stubborn, impossible people spun through the void, waiting to hear whether the universe was ready for them. Yuna counted her pull-ups in silence. She had a long year ahead. Physical assessment week arrived like a storm that everyone knew was coming, but nobody wanted to face. The Academy's training grounds stretched across an entire level of Alo's station. Running tracks, climbing walls, resistance chambers, reflex courses, and dozens of machines designed to measure every possible aspect of a cadet's body. The tests were calibrated to the galactic average, which meant they were built for species that came from calm, gentle worlds where the biggest daily danger was a strong breeze. Han Yuna stood in line with the other cadets, wearing the standard gray training suit. She was shorter than almost everyone around her. A group of Veeth cadets whispered behind her, their translucent wings fluttering with nervous energy. Ahead of her, Olur the Gran cracked his neck and rolled his massive shoulders. He had been the top physical performer in every class for 2 years straight, and he intended to keep it that way. Cadets ran on a long circular track, while the system measured their speed, heart rate, breathing, and time to exhaustion. Most cadets lasted between 15 and 30 minutes. The Grand species, built for heavy gravity, averaged around 40. Allure finished at 44 minutes and stepped off the track with a satisfied grunt. Yuna started running. She kept a steady, easy pace, not fast, not slow. Her breathing was calm. Her arms swung naturally at her sides. 10 minutes passed, 20, 30. The monitoring system began flashing yellow alerts. At 45 minutes, it turned orange. At 1 hour, it flagged her results as a sensor malfunction and requested a system reset. She was still running. The technician operating the machine, a small furry pellet with large round eyes, stared at the screen, then at Yuna, then back at the screen. He called his supervisor. The supervisor called Instructor Dorvan. By the time Dorvan arrived, Yuna had been running for 1 hour and 23 minutes. She was sweating lightly, but her stride had not changed. She looked like she could run for another hour. Dorvan told her to stop. She stepped off the track, wiped her forehead with her sleeve, and said, "Was that enough?" Dorvan did not answer. He just looked at the numbers on the screen for a very long time. The grip strength test came next. Cadets squeezed a device that measured the force of their hands. Allure scored the highest in his species range, which was already the highest in the academy. Yuna stepped up, wrapped her fingers around the device, and squeezed. The number climbed past the Grand average and kept going. The device beeped an error. The technician replaced it with a heavier model. The number climbed past the new device's expected range. The reflex test was worse, or better, depending on who was watching. A small launcher fired projectiles at random speeds and angles. Cadets were supposed to dodge or block them. The fastest species in the room managed to react to about 60% of the shots. Yuna caught one out of the air with her bare hand. Not deflected, caught, like picking fruit from a tree. Dorvan re-administered the test himself, standing 3 meters away, watching her with his amber eyes. She caught 2 more. He ended the test early and walked out without saying a word. By the end of the week, the entire academy was talking about the human. Not by name. Most cadets still did not know her name. They called her the Deathworlder, and the word carried a strange weight, like a title from an old war story that nobody fully believed. Allure was furious. He found Yuna in the mess hall during evening meal. She was sitting alone, eating something from a sealed container she had brought from her quarters. Human food that the station's kitchens could not replicate. Allure dropped his tray on the table across from her and sat down hard enough to shake the bench. "You think you are better than me?" he said. His voice was deep and rough, like gravel rolling downhill. Yuna looked up at him. He was 3 times her weight and almost a full meter taller. His skin was gray and thick, like stone. His hands could crush metal. "No," she said. "I am not here to compete with you. I am here to pass." Allure stared at her. He was not used to people being calm when he was angry. He opened his mouth, closed it, then stood up and walked away, taking his tray with him. He did not look back. 3 systems away in the Union Embassy on the station world of Pelos, Bake Tejo sat in his office, reading a classified report. Admiral Kyle, one of the senior Veeth officers in the Union military, had filed a formal request to review Yuna's enrollment. The language was careful and political, but the meaning was clear. Kyle believed humans were too dangerous to be allowed into the academy. He wanted the exchange program suspended. Tejo leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. He had spent 3 years building the diplomatic relationships needed to get a single human cadet into the academy. 1 cadet, 1 chance, and now a frightened admiral was trying to close the door before it had fully opened. He sent Yuna a coded message. "Political pressure is building. Some factions want you removed. Try to be unremarkable." He paused, then added, "I know that might be difficult now." In the academy library, a vast, quiet space filled with floating data terminals. Yuna sat, reading a tactical manual, when a soft voice interrupted her. "Excuse me, may I sit here?" The speaker was Cadet Lian, an Athni. Lian was slender and pale, with skin that glowed faintly blue in dim light, like moonlight trapped under glass. She was physically the weakest species in the class. Athni bones were hollow, and their muscles were thin. But Lian was ranked first in strategy, tactics, and theoretical warfare. Her mind was as sharp as Allur's fists were heavy. "Go ahead," Yuna said. Lian sat down and studied Yuna with wide, luminous eyes. "I have been reading about your planet," she said. "I have questions." "Everyone does," Yuna said. "What does rain feel like?" Yuna blinked. Of all the questions she had expected, about her strength, her reflexes, her species' history of war, this was not one of them. "It feels cold," Yuna said slowly. "Small drops of water falling from the sky. Sometimes gentle, sometimes so hard it hurts. When it stops, everything smells clean. And wind? It pushes against you. It carries sounds from far away. It messes up your hair." Yuna almost smiled. On bad days, it can pick up trees and throw them. Lian's glow brightened slightly, the Atheny equivalent of wide-eyed wonder. "And you live with this? Every day?" "We do not just live with it," Yuna said. For the first time since arriving at the academy, she smiled fully. "We love it. You learn to love the storm." Lian smiled back. It was a small, careful smile, but it was real. She did not look afraid. She looked fascinated. And Yuna realized, sitting in that quiet library on a station 1,000 light-years from home, that she'd had just made her first friend. That night, Instructor Dorvan sat alone in his office. The lights dimmed, Yuna's full biometric profile floating in front of him. Bone density, nearly 3 times the galactic average. Muscle fiber composition, a mix of fast and slow types that allowed both explosive power and long endurance. Healing rate. Wounds that would take a Vith weeks to recover from would close on a human in days. Immune system. An aggressive, adaptive network that attacked foreign organisms with something close to fury. Dorvan had spent his career studying soldiers from every corner of the galaxy. He had trained the best. He had fought beside them and against them. He knew what strength looked like. He knew what danger looked like. He had never seen anything like this. He turned off the display and sat in the dark, staring at the wall. After a long silence, he whispered to himself, "What kind of world makes something like this?" Outside, the stars gave no answer. They just burned, the way they always had, steady, silent, and impossibly far from a small blue planet that nobody in the galaxy had taken seriously until now. The dropship shook as it punched through the simulated atmosphere, and Yuna tightened her grip on the overhead rail. Around her, 5 cadets sat strapped into their seats, faces tight with fear and focus. The mission briefing had been simple. Survive 36 hours on a Class 7 holographic world. Navigate to the extraction point and get everyone out alive. No weapons, no external communication. Just the team, the environment, and whatever they carried on their backs. The simulation chambers on Alos were enormous. Sealed domes nearly 2 kilometers across, capable of generating terrain, weather, atmosphere, and wildlife so realistic that the body could not tell the difference. The temperature was real, the rain was real, the pain was real, only death was simulated, and even that came with consequences. A failed cadet would be pulled from the program for a full cycle. Yuna's team was not one she would have chosen. Allur sat across from her, his massive arms crossed, refusing to look at her. Lian was beside her, calm but pale, her blue glow dimmer than usual. 2 other cadets filled the remaining seats. A Vith named Taro, whose wings trembled whenever the ship hit turbulence, and a pellet named Suin, small and round-eyed, and already breathing too fast. The dropship landed hard. The door opened, and heat rolled in like a wall. The simulated world outside was a jungle of dark red plants under a bruised orange sky. The air was thick and tasted of metal. Somewhere in the distance, something screamed, a long, high sound that echoed off the trees and made Suin whimper. "Move," Allure said. He was already on his feet, pushing past the others toward the door. He was used to being in charge. On his homeworld, the strongest led, and no one questioned it. They walked for 3 hours. Allure set the pace, fast, aggressive, straight toward the extraction point, without stopping. Lien kept up by focusing on each step, though her thin legs were not built for rough terrain. Taro flew short distances when the ground became too difficult, burning energy he could not afford to waste. Soon stumbled often, but said nothing. Yuna walked at the back and watched everything. She watched the way the plants leaned away from certain patches of ground, which meant something underground was producing heat or toxin. She watched the sky, where the clouds moved in strange spirals that reminded her of typhoon patterns on Earth. She watched the way the red leaves curled inward when the wind shifted direction, which meant rain was coming, and on a Class 7 world, rain could mean acid, flood, or worse. She said nothing. Not yet. The first crisis came at hour 5. The ground ahead of them was covered in low fog, a thick yellowish mist that pooled in the hollows between the trees. 3 steps in, his breathing monitor began screaming. The fog was toxic. He stumbled back, coughing, his gray skin flushed dark. "Poisonous atmosphere pocket," Lien said, pulling up her scanner. "Hydrogen sulfide concentration. We need another route." Allure wiped his mouth and looked at the fog with fury, as if he could frighten it into moving. "There is no other route. The extraction point is north. This valley runs north." "Then we go over," Yuna said quietly. Everyone looked at her. She pointed to the ridge above the valley, steep, rocky, covered in sharp red vegetation. It would take hours to climb, but the air up there was clean. Allure shook his head. "Too slow." "Breathing poison is slower," Yuna said. They climbed the ridge. It took 4 hours. Allure's heavy body struggled on the loose rock, and twice Yuna had to brace herself beneath him to keep him from sliding backward. She did it without complaint, without even changing her expression. Her legs burned and her shoulders ached, but these were familiar feelings. On Earth, she had trained in mountains. She had carried packs through mud and snow and heat. Her body knew how to suffer and keep moving. That was the first lesson Earth taught every human. Pain is not a stop sign. It is just information. At the top of the ridge, they rested. The orange sky was darkening, and the temperature was dropping fast. Yuna estimated they had 26 hours left. The extraction point was still 18 kilometers away. The second crisis came at hour 14. They were moving through a narrow canyon when the rain started. Not water, but a warm, sticky liquid that burned faintly on contact with skin. Taro's wings began dissolving at the edges. He screamed and folded them tight against his back, but the damage was done. He could no longer fly. Lien's glow had faded to almost nothing. The Aethne body dimmed when it was exhausted, and Allure, who had been leading the group through sheer force of will, stepped wrong on a slick rock and fell. The sound was terrible, a deep, wet crack that echoed off the canyon walls. Allure roared, not in anger, but in pain. His left leg was bent at an angle that no leg should bend. The bone analog in his shin had fractured clean through. The team stopped. Soon sat down and stared at nothing. Taro pressed his back against the canyon wall and closed his eyes. Lien knelt beside Allure, scanning the break, and looked up at Yuna with an expression that said what her voice could not. "This is over." Yuna knelt beside Olur. He was breathing hard, his gray face twisted with pain, his massive hands gripping the ground so hard that his fingers left marks in the stone. "Do not touch me," he growled. "I am going to splint your leg," Yuna said. She pulled a thick, straight branch from a nearby plant, tested its strength by bending it across her knee, and tore strips of fabric from the bottom of her uniform. She worked quickly and carefully, her hands steady, her movements precise. She had learned this when she was 12 years old, on a camping trip in the mountains with her school. A boy in her group had fallen and broken his arm, and their teacher had shown them how to stabilize the bone until help arrived. On Earth, children learned these things. On Earth, the world broke you early and often, and you either learned to fix things or you did not survive. Olur gritted his teeth as she tightened the splint. He did not scream again. When she finished, he looked at her with something that was not quite gratitude and not quite anger. It was something in between. The look of a proud creature realizing that it needed help, and hating that realization, but accepting it anyway. "Can you stand?" Yuna asked. "I can barely feel my leg." "Then I will carry you." Olur stared at her. He weighed nearly 300 kilograms. "You cannot." Yuna did not argue. She turned around, crouched, and pulled his arm over her shoulder. Then she stood up. Her legs shook, her spine compressed. Every muscle in her body screamed. But she stood, and she took a step, and then another, and then another. Lian watched from behind, her luminous eyes wide. She began quietly recording everything on her personal datapad, not for the academy, not for grades, but for herself. She was beginning to understand something important. Yuna was not the strongest creature she had ever seen. Olur was stronger. The Dren soldiers they studied in tactics class were stronger. Even some machines were stronger. But Yuna did not stop. That was the difference. She did not specialize in one thing. She adapted to everything. When the path was blocked, she found another. When a teammate fell, she picked him up. When the environment tried to kill them, she read it like a book and turned its own rules against it. Humans were not the apex predators of the galaxy. They were something stranger and more frightening. They were the species that simply refused to die. Yuna carried a lure for 6 kilometers through rough terrain before the extraction point came into view. Her legs were shaking badly by then. Her vision was blurred with sweat and effort. Lian walked beside her, guiding her steps, calling out roots and rocks and drops. Taro supported Allur's other side as best he could. Even Soon, who had barely spoken the entire mission, carried all of their packs without being asked. They crossed the extraction line together. The dome lights came on. Medical teams rushed in. They were the only team that extracted with all members alive. In the mess hall that evening, Yuna sat alone, as usual, eating slowly, her body aching in places she did not know could ache. She did not expect anyone to join her. A tray landed on the table across from her. She looked up. Olur stood there, his leg wrapped in a medical brace, his face unreadable. He sat down heavily. He did not say thank you. He did not say anything at all. He just sat there, eating beside her, and that was enough. Later that night, Yuna received a message from Tejo. She read it twice. Admiral Kyle had filed a formal motion with the Union Security Council to suspend the human exchange program. A hearing was scheduled. She would need to speak for her entire species. Yuna put the pad down and looked out her window at the stars. Somewhere out there, Earth was spinning, wild and dangerous and full of people who got knocked down every single day and stood back up every single time. She closed her eyes and thought about rain, real rain, cold and clean, falling on her face, washing everything away. She was not afraid. She had survived worse than a hearing. She had survived Earth. The Union Security Council chamber was built to make anyone standing in its center feel small. It was a vast semicircle of polished dark stone, with rows of seats rising steeply on all sides, like the inside of a mouth. Representatives from over 60 species filled those seats, some enormous, some tiny, some floating in gravity-assisted chairs, some breathing through filtered masks, because the chamber's atmosphere was not quite right for their biology. Light came from above, cold and white, falling in a single column onto the floor at the center, where the speaker was meant to stand. Han Yuna stood in that column of light, and tried not to think about how many eyes were watching her. She wore her academy uniform, cleaned and pressed, the fabric still slightly too large for her frame. Her hair was pulled back tight. She looked exactly like what she was, a young soldier, very far from home, standing alone in a room full of creatures who were deciding whether her kind deserved to exist among them. Admiral Kyle spoke first. He was old Veeth, tall and thin, with wings that had gone silver with age, and eyes like polished black stones. He moved slowly to the speaking platform, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who had commanded fleets and buried friends, and believed completely that he was doing the right thing. "Honored representatives," Kyle began, "I do not come before you out of hatred. I come out of duty. 8 years ago, we made first contact with a species from a world that our own survey teams classified as a Class 12 environment, the highest danger rating in our system. A world where everything, the weather, the geology, the biology, exists in a state of constant, violent competition." He touched his control pad, and the holographic display behind him came alive. Images of Earth filled the chamber. Not the beautiful images, not the sunsets or the oceans or the green fields. Kale had chosen carefully. He showed hurricanes tearing apart coastlines, volcanoes burying cities in ash, earthquakes splitting the ground open. He showed footage of predators, sharks, lions, crocodiles, killing and feeding. He showed footage of war, human war, soldiers, explosions, burned cities, marching armies, thousands of years of it, compressed into minutes. The chamber was silent. Some representatives looked away. A Pelid delegate covered her eyes with both hands. Even Olur, watching from a screen in the Academy Medical Bay where his leg was still healing, felt his stomach tighten. Kale let the images speak, and then he continued. "The species that survived this world, that thrived on it, has now sent a representative to our most prestigious military institution. A single cadet. And in her first assessment cycle, this cadet outperformed every physical benchmark we have. She ran longer than any cadet in Academy history. She demonstrated reflexes that our instruments could not properly measure. She carried a 300-kilogram Gron on her back across 6 kilometers of hostile terrain." He paused. The silence was heavy. "I ask you to consider what this means. Not what it means today, with one cadet, in one academy, but what it means tomorrow, when there are 100, 1,000, 1,000,000. These are not diplomats. These are not scholars. These are organisms forged in the most hostile environment our galaxy has ever documented, and they breed in billions." He looked directly at Yuna. "Only fear. Would you invite a hurricane to sit in your child's classroom?" he asked. He stepped back. The chamber buzzed with low murmurs. Yuna could feel the mood shifting, tilting toward Kyle, like water running downhill. Fear was easy. Fear was fast. It did not need evidence or logic. It just needed a picture of a shark and a mushroom cloud, and a voice that sounded certain. The council moderator, an ancient gray-skinned being whose species Yuna did not recognize, turned to her. "Cadet Han, you may respond." Yuna walked to the center of the light. She did not have a control pad. She had no images to show. She had only her voice and the truth, and she was not sure either one would be enough. She took a breath. Then she began. Everything the Admiral showed you is true. The murmurs stopped. Whatever the representatives had expected her to say, it was not that. Our world is violent, Yuna continued. Her voice was steady, but quiet. She was not trying to fill the room. She was trying to reach it. It is unstable. The ground shakes. The sky burns. The oceans swallow ships. There are creatures in our forests that can kill a human in seconds, and diseases in our soil that can kill in hours. Our planet has tried to destroy us every single day for 300,000 years. She paused. The silence in the chamber was absolute. And we are still here. She let the words hang. Then she continued, speaking slowly, simply, as if she were explaining something to a child. Not because she thought less of her audience, but because the truth was simple and deserved simple words. We are not still here because we are the strongest. We are not the fastest. We are not the biggest. There are animals on our world that are all of those things, and we survived alongside them, not by being better, but by being together. We invented medicine because we kept getting sick. We invented shelter because the cold would kill us. We invented language, writing, music, law, not because we were gifted, but because we were desperate. Alone, a human is fragile. Together, we are something else. She looked at the rows of faces watching her, alien, strange, afraid, and she felt a sudden, deep sadness. Not for herself, for them, because she understood their fear. She came from a world that taught fear before it taught anything else. Everything you are afraid of, our endurance, our adaptability, our stubbornness, exists because our world gave us no other choice. We did not choose to be this way. We were made this way. By storms, by disease, by predators, by a planet that never once made life easy. And the only reason we survived is that when one of us falls, another one picks them up. She thought of Olor on her back, heavy and hurt, and the way her legs had screamed with every step. She thought of Suin, carrying every pack, without being asked. You call our world a death world, Yuna said. And maybe it is. Maybe that name is accurate. But we do not call it that. We call it home. And everything we learned there, every scar, every instinct, every stubborn refusal to stop breathing, we bring with us. Not as weapons, as gifts. Because a species that learned to survive the worst has a lot to offer a galaxy that has never had to. She looked at Admiral Kyle. He was watching her with an expression she could not quite read. You asked if you should invite a hurricane into a classroom, she said. But I am not a hurricane, Admiral. I am what the hurricane left behind. And what the hurricane leaves behind is something that knows how to rebuild. She stepped back from the light and stood still. She had nothing more to say. The chamber was silent for a long time. Then Commandant Firol stood from her seat in the observer's gallery. The insectoid officer's voice was sharp and clear as she entered into the official record that Cadet Han Yuna had maintained exemplary conduct throughout her enrollment, had committed 0 disciplinary infractions, and had been directly responsible for the complete survival of her team during the most recent field assessment. No other team had achieved this. Then, to everyone's surprise, Instructor Dorvan submitted a statement as well. It was short. It said only, "In 19 years of service, I have never trained a more capable cadet. Remove her, and you remove the best soldier this academy has produced." The motion to suspend the human exchange program was tabled. Not defeated, but delayed. Admiral Kale left the chamber without speaking. His face was calm, but his silver wings were pressed flat against his back, which in Vith body language meant something between anger and deep unease. Yuna walked out of the chamber and into the corridor. Her legs were shaking, though not from physical effort. She had faced survival simulations, hostile environments, and creatures that could crush her with one hand. But standing in that room, under that light, with the future of her species balanced on her words, that had been the hardest thing she had ever done. Lian was waiting outside. Beside her, leaning on a medical crutch, was Olur. His gray face was unreadable. But when Yuna approached, he nodded once and said, "Good speech, Deathworlder." It was the first time anyone had called her that, without making it sound like an insult. Yuna laughed. It came out of her before she could stop it, a short, bright human sound that echoed off the corridor walls and made two passing Veeth officers turn their heads in alarm. Lian smiled. Olur almost did. 3 systems away, Bake Teho watched the broadcast of the hearing in his office. When Yuna finished speaking, he leaned back in his chair and let out a breath he had been holding for what felt like years. He sat there for a long moment, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the day settle around him. Then he picked up his communication pad and sent Yuna a single message. "Earth is proud. Now finish what you started." Yuna read the message in her quarters that night. She read it twice, then set the pad face down on her desk and looked out the window at the stars. The hearing was over. The door was still open, but she knew, with the quiet certainty of someone who had learned to read storms, that the real test had not arrived yet. It was coming, and when it came, words would not be enough. 6 months changed everything and nothing. Yuna was still the smallest cadet in most rooms. She still ate alone sometimes, from sealed containers of food the station kitchens could not make. She still got stares in the corridors, though the nature of those stares had shifted from fear to something closer to curiosity, and sometimes, from certain cadets, something that looked almost like respect. Her scores told the story that her quiet nature did not. She was not the strongest. Olur still held that rank, his leg fully healed and his pride slowly mending alongside it. She was not the best tactician. Lian held that title, her brilliant mind turning every battlefield into a puzzle she had already solved. But in the combined rankings, where every skill was measured together, endurance, combat, strategy, leadership, adaptability, teamwork, Han Yuna sat at the top. The most complete cadet the Academy had seen in decades. Not the best at any one thing. The best at everything at once. Commandant Firal had noticed. Instructor Dorvan had noticed. Even Admiral Kyle, watching from a distance with his silver wings folded tight, had noticed. The galaxy was slowly waking up to something it did not fully understand yet. That the most dangerous thing about humans was not their strength or their speed. It was that they never stopped learning. The distress signal arrived on a Tuesday. Yuna was in the training hall, practicing close-quarters combat with Olur, when every communication screen on the station went red at the same time. A Union border station, Station Row 7, 3 hours away by fast transport, had sent an emergency broadcast. The message was short and broken by static. Hostile incursion, multiple breaches, defenders overwhelmed, civilians trapped, requesting immediate assistance. The nearest Union fleet was 6 hours out. By the time they arrived, it would be too late. The hostile force was the Dren hegemony. Yuna had studied them in tactics class. They were large, taller than Olur, covered in natural bone armor, bred and trained for conquest. The Dren did not negotiate. They took what they wanted, and what they wanted was territory. Commandant Firal made a decision that had never been made before. She authorized a rapid response cadet deployment, a transport loaded with senior cadets and led by a combat instructor, sent to hold Station Row 7 until the fleet arrived. On paper, it was a training exercise. Everyone knew it was not. Yuna, Olur, and Lian were among the 20 cadets selected. Instructor Dorvan led the mission. He stood at the front of the transport as it launched, his amber eyes scanning the faces before him, and said only, "This is real. Act like it." The transport docked with Station Row 7 40 minutes later. The airlock opened, and the smell hit them first. Smoke, burned metal, and something chemical and sharp that stung the inside of Yuna's nose. The station's lights were flickering. Emergency alarms pulsed in the walls like a heartbeat. Somewhere deep inside the structure, they could hear gunfire. Dorvan split the cadets into 3 groups. He took the first group to reinforce the main defensive line, where the station's surviving garrison was holding a corridor. He sent the second group to evacuate civilians from the lower levels. The third group, Yuna, Olur, Lian, and 4 other cadets, was tasked with reaching the operations center and restoring communications so they could coordinate with the incoming fleet. They moved fast. The station was a maze of dark corridors and sealed doors, some of which had been forced open from the outside. Scorch marks lined the walls. Debris crunched under their boots. Twice they passed bodies, station crew who had not made it to shelter. Yuna looked at them, memorized their faces, and kept moving. Grief was for later. Right now, grief was a luxury. They reached the operations center and found it damaged but functional. Lian sat down at the main console and began working immediately, her thin fingers flying across controls that were not designed for her species. Within minutes, she had partial communications restored. The picture she painted was grim. The Dren had breached 3 sectors. The garrison was holding 1 corridor, but losing ground. And the fleet was still 5 hours away. Then the lights went out. Not the emergency lights. Everything. Total darkness. The station shuddered. A deep metallic groan echoed through the hull. "They have hit the power core," Lian said. Her voice was calm, but her glow had faded to almost nothing. "Backup power in 90 seconds. In those 90 seconds of pure darkness, Yuna heard them. Heavy footsteps, many of them, coming from the maintenance shaft to the left of the operations center. A route that was not on the standard schematics. A route the Dren had found on their own. The backup lights flickered on just as the first Dren soldier came through the wall. It was enormous, nearly 3 meters tall, covered in plates of natural bone that looked like gray stone, eyes like burning coals set deep in a skull that was all jaw and no mercy. It carried a weapon in each of its 4 hands. Behind it, more shapes moved in the dark of the shaft. 5, 10, more. Olur roared and charged. He hit the first Dren like a landslide, and the 2 of them crashed into the wall hard enough to crack the plating. The other cadets opened fire. The operations center became chaos. Smoke, noise, the flash of weapons, the deep grunting of Dren soldiers pushing forward through the breach. Yuna did not freeze. She did not panic. She looked at the breach, looked at the maintenance shaft behind it, and made a decision in the time it took her heart to beat twice. "Lian," she said, "guide me through the shaft layout. I need to reach the other side of their entry point." "That is a 400-meter crawl through maintenance tunnels," Lian said. "In the dark, with Dren on the other side." "I know." Lian looked at her for 1 second. Then she pulled up the shaft schematics and began reading coordinates. Yuna ran. She entered the maintenance shaft through a side panel, dropped into a crawl space barely wide enough for her shoulders, and moved. The tunnels were dark, hot, and tight, the kind of space that would drive most species into panic. Yuna had grown up exploring caves in the mountains near her hometown. Tight spaces did not frighten her. The dark did not frighten her. The only thing that frightened her was the thought of her team dying while she crawled through a metal tube. She moved fast, following Lian's voice in her earpiece. Left, right, down, climb, left again. She could hear the Dren above and beside her, their heavy boots shaking the walls. Her shoulders scraped against metal. Her knees bled. She kept moving. She emerged behind the Dren line, in the section of corridor they had used to enter the station. The breach point was ahead of her, a torn open hull panel connected to an external boarding pod. 3 Dren soldiers guarded it. They were not expecting an attack from this direction. They were not expecting an attack from a creature half their size. Yuna hit the first one from behind. She was not stronger than a Dren. But she was faster, and she knew where the joints in their bone armor were weakest. She had studied their anatomy in class, because on Earth, you studied everything that might try to kill you. She struck hard and precise, targeting the gaps between plates, and the first Dren went down before it understood what was happening. The second one turned and swung. It hit her across the shoulder, and the impact sent her into the wall. Pain exploded through her arm. Something cracked. Maybe a rib, maybe the wall, maybe both. She tasted blood. She got up. On Earth, you got up. That was the rule. That was the only rule that mattered. She fought the second Dren with one working arm, and a fury that was quiet and cold and absolutely human. She won. Not cleanly, not easily, but she won. The third Dren looked at its 2 fallen companions, looked at the small bleeding creature standing in front of the breach with fire in her dark eyes, and for the first time in its life, it hesitated. Yuna sealed the breach. She used the station's emergency hull controls to slam the blast door shut on the boarding pod, cutting off the Dren's entry point. The flow of soldiers stopped. On the other side of the operations center, Olur and the cadets pushed the remaining Dren back. Without reinforcements, the attackers were outnumbered. Dorvan, bleeding from a wound across his face, led the final push from the main corridor. The garrison rallied. The cadets held. The Dren withdrew. When the Union fleet arrived 5 hours later, they found Station Row 7 battered, burned, and still standing. 20 cadets, 1 instructor, and a handful of garrison survivors had held a border station against a Dren incursion force. The fleet commander walked through the damaged corridors, looked at the sealed breach point, and asked who had closed it. When they told him it was a human cadet, he asked them to repeat the answer. They did. In the station's mess hall, after the medics had finished and the adrenaline had faded, the cadets sat together among the wreckage. Olur had fresh bandages wrapped around his arms and chest. Lien was so exhausted that her skin had gone completely dark, no glow at all. Yuna sat between them, her left arm in a sling, a gash across her forehead closed with medical adhesive, eating a ration bar with her right hand, like nothing had happened. Lien started laughing first. It was a soft, breathless sound, barely audible. Then Olur laughed, a deep rumbling noise that shook his entire body and made the table rattle. Then Yuna laughed, and it was the most human sound in the galaxy, bright, tired, alive, and full of something that no translator could convert, but every species in the room understood. They were alive. They were together. That was enough. 3 months later, the human exchange program was not only continued, but expanded. 5 new human cadets were admitted to the academy. Admiral Kyle's motion was quietly archived and never brought to a vote. Commandant Firol personally awarded Yuna a commendation in a ceremony attended by representatives from 40 species. Dorvan stood in the back row and watched, his amber eyes unreadable, his arms folded, and if anyone had looked closely, they would have seen the faintest trace of a smile on his reptilian face, the first in 19 years of teaching. 1 year later, a new class of cadets sat in the same lecture hall where it had all started. A xenobiology instructor, not Dorvan, who had been promoted, was teaching planetary classifications. A young Pelid cadet raised her hand and asked with the wide-eyed curiosity of someone hearing a legend for the first time, "Is it true that a human once carried a Gron on her back for 6 kilometers?" The instructor paused. She looked at the class, at the dozens of young faces from dozens of worlds, and she said, "Deathworlders are no longer legends. One of them graduated top of her class last year." The cadets whispered among themselves. Some looked excited. Some looked nervous. In the back row, a human cadet, one of the 5 new ones, sat quietly and smiled. Far away, on the bridge of a Union patrol vessel cutting through the dark between stars, Lieutenant Han Yuna stood at her post and watched the void. Beside her, Oloror, now her assigned partner, monitored the tactical display with steady hands. Behind her, Lien, now an intelligence officer, ran calculations that would have taken most species hours. On Yuna's desk, in her small private quarters below the bridge, there was a framed photograph of Earth, blue and green and wrapped in storms, violent, beautiful, home. She had not saved the galaxy. She had not conquered anyone. She had simply stood up in a classroom, raised her hand, and told the truth. And then she had done the only thing humans knew how to do. She had kept going, one stubborn step at a time, until the universe had no choice but to make room. Outside the viewport, the stars burned on. And somewhere among them, a small blue planet full of impossible people kept spinning, kept storming, kept shaking, kept growing, waiting for the rest of the galaxy to catch up.